Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the Darwinism course. Today we are going to be looking into a 360 perspective of Darwinian evolution. Why does Darwinism matter? Now, before we get into the details, I just want to summarize why you watching this right now, Darwinism has already impacted you, because Darwinism is the most influential scientific theory ever. It is a theory about origins, about not only our anatomy, our physiology, our psychology, but also society and politics, economics, even warfare. And what we find is that this theory has seeped into all arenas in a way that is actually inescapable. So we're going to be looking into the history of Darwinism, the philosophy of Darwinism, the science of Darwinism, the implications of Darwinism, the transformation of Darwinism from a science into a philosophical perspective, a religious perspective, and also looking into the future of this theory. And I have a live audience, and I'm going to be, inshallah, interacting with them throughout this. So the first thing I want to do is I actually want to ask the audience this question, the people here in the studio. Why is Darwinism important for us to study? You have the mic. Maybe you can begin.
Sure. Because it's something that's changed Western thought.
Yes.
And I think it's now bleeding over into the Islamic world, and it's changing. It's not only changing perceptions, but it's also being a detriment to our youth as well. We're growing up with we're seeing increasing atheism.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very harmful effect.
Sure.
And it's important that we fully study this and unpack it in this series, inshallah.
Okay, excellent. I would just add something to for you to key off. When you said seeping into the Islamic world, think of it from the perspective that the Islamic world was dominated by state atheism, at least a large section of it during the 20th century. So we had the Soviet Union and we had communist China. They applied state atheism to their education system. And one of the key tenets of that was scientific materialism in the guise of Darwinism. So what you would actually find amongst the Soviets when it came to the Central Asian republics, and we know there's a lot of Muslims in that neck of the woods, mosques were destroyed, imams were killed. Even Mongolia, which has Muslims in the western side, there's a lot of oppression going as far as Albania in Europe, and again in communist China, what's been happening to the general population of the people who believe in God, not just the Muslims. So Darwinism was imposed upon them, and it was actually part of their state atheism indoctrination of the youth. So there may be a seeping of Darwinism in terms of social media now, but we've been through it for 100 years. So it's actually something that's already negatively impacted the Muslim world in a very big way. Okay, why else? Why else is Darwinism important to study? Maybe you can...
Me. I'm going to piggyback a little bit off the point that you made, but I think it's one of the number one reasons that atheists appeal to for their reason not to believe in God. So at least in my experience, whenever you ask an atheist, why do they not believe in God? Often one of the default answers that comes back is, oh, how can you believe in God? Have you not studied evolution? So I think it's a very common answer. And as the brother correctly said, it's something that I hear or have heard Muslims saying as well. It's almost to the point, I think, similar to the Christians, where there are some Muslims today who will accept God-guided evolution. So at some level, it's come to the point where they feel like they have to, at some level, accept evolution at least, just to remain consistent with their belief.
Sure.
So yeah, that's the reason.
That's actually a brilliant way of putting it. And what I would actually add to that is it's not only used as a justification for people today. It was used as a justification for people at the turn of the 19th century, right? So what we what we have is we have a theory which is being used to push away Christianity, push away Islam, push away any of these traditional beliefs. And what we find is that the justification for atheism using evolutionary theory was happening at the time of Darwin. And Darwin actually had to respond to it because he actually openly started challenging the idea of his theory being tied to atheism. So he said in letters, statements to the effect of, it's absurd to think that you cannot be an evolutionist and a theist. Likewise, the people who were influenced by this particular theory, they took it more than a theory. They took it as a worldview. They took it as a religion. Now, when I say this, right, when I say they made Darwinism into a religion, the first thing that the response we get is, well, you are a religion, you're Muslims, you're whatever, so you're just trying to say we're a religion too. But I want to give them something from the horse's mouth, not just looking at their behavior from a sociological perspective. Julian Huxley was the grandson of Thomas Henry Huxley, who was known as Darwin's bulldog. And he was one of the most important evolutionary scientists for the last 100 years. He's one of the main proponents and pioneers of neo-Darwinism. And we're going to get into definitions of what is neo-Darwinism, what is extended evolutionary synthesis, all these things later, inshallah. And what's so interesting is that in the early part of the 20th century, he acknowledged that there is a religion without revelation. Okay, and that was actually the title of his book, Religion Without Revelation. And he believed the religion to be evolutionary humanism. And he was open about it. He was open that this is the religion of humanity. This is the religion of the future. And what's so interesting is that from Julian Huxley, and Huxley, in terms of his books, he was writing this, I believe, in the late 1990s. Then we have, in 2016, a landmark publication by Michael Roos, published by Oxford University. And the title of the book is what's inside the book, right? And the title is Darwinism as Religion, right? It is literally Darwinism as religion. What Roos goes on to argue is, there is the scientific theory, no problem. There is the valid scientific theory, model, paradigm, natural selection, random mutations, all of that. But apart from that, it has evolved into a secular religious perspective, right? So from the time of Huxley all the way to Michael Roos, a lot of people have started to recognize. Now, Mary Midgley, again, another philosopher, her book, Evolution as Religion. And we have New Bottles for New Wine, again, by Julian Huxley. So we have a lot of this stuff coming out from the mouths of people who believe in the actual theory, not religious people. And they're basically saying there is this element. Now, to understand the mother of the issue, the crux of the issue, we have to look into why. Why is that the case? And Dawkins summarizes it in his books in the 1980s. So Climbing Mount Improbable and The Blind Watchmaker. What he basically says is this. Atheism allowed us to be Darwinism allowed us to be intellectually fulfilled atheists. Darwinism allowed us to be intellectually fulfilled atheists. Now, what does that mean? That means you are tied to this theory, not just from a scientific perspective. There's something about your own worldview which is linked to this theory. So now you're starting to see why books like The God Delusion have made Darwinism the central point of their argument against God, as you rightly pointed out. And also, he talks about how it was hard to imagine being an atheist before 1859 being the publication of The Origin of Species. So think of it from an Islamic perspective. If we as Muslims discover a theory, or scientists rather discover a theory, which happens to dovetail with Islam, would we as Muslims be more inclined towards the theory or not? Would we be more biased towards it in its favor? Yes, we would. If there is a theory which purports to show that atheism is true, supposedly, then we would be inclined to believe it to be true. So we start to understand what is the issue. The issue is, it is more than just science. The implications of the theory leads people to believe in their worldview, which is atheism in this case. Therefore, they're more tied to it. And that's why when we get into some of the reasons why Darwinists go beyond the evidence, and you get a lot of propaganda, and you get a lot of exaggeration, and you get a lot of very vacuous sort of statements being made, which are made to look as if they are substantial. But in reality, the evidence is lacking, and they will use sophistry, they'll use rhetoric, they'll use sometimes bullying tactics to shut down competition, right? And we will understand that coming from Darwinism as a religion, not just a scientific theory. Okay, why else does it matter that we study Darwinism?
Just to expand on the previous points, it directly contradicts the creation narrative, or at least the equation of humans.
Yes.
So, of course, we as Muslims believe that Allah created Adam, but then in evolution you have a more gradual process for that. So this, at the very least, it leads to deism. So we're rejecting organized religion, and at the very worst, it leads to atheism. Yeah,
absolutely. It challenges the creation story, but even if we are to strip down the creation story to not the Islamic perspective, but say a very basic perspective that the initial creation of life was God, it challenges all of that. And this is why anybody who has faith in God, believes in transcendent God, this is a very important theory to tackle, just because of that reason alone. So it speaks about origins, and the origins, it's not just the origin of life, it's the origin of man, it's the origin of consciousness, it's the origin of emotions, it's the origin of our values, it's the origins of morality and ethics. It's also, interestingly, and we're going to get into, this is why I said it's a 360 view, it's also an origin when it comes to epistemology. This is so interesting, right? Now, in rational choice theory, we will act in a way to maximize utility. This is just the standard way that it's defined. But if our cognitive architecture was designed under natural selection, then the goal is not maximizing utility, it's maximizing fitness. There's a contradiction. Then also, natural selection has shaped us to value what's adaptively good for us as opposed to what's true. And Anthony O'Hare, in his book Beyond Evolution, he gets into this in a lot more detail. So we're going to get into those separate modules, inshallah, as the classes progress. So you can see here, we're going to get into the thick of the science, get into things like homology, homoplasy, tree of life. We're also going to get into the origin, actually, of rationality, and the origin of emotions, and the origin of values and where they come from. And then how they use Darwinism when it comes to speaking about political issues as well. Because from their perspective, states are a collection of humans. Humans are the product of evolution. And since we evolved in a particular environment, that environment will dictate the sort of biases that we have inbuilt within us that will make us make certain decisions. So, for example, when it comes to a war currently between the Zionist state and Palestine, they will have an evolutionary explanation for that in terms of territory, in terms of resources, in terms of maximizing fitness. Like, you would think, no, this is too much. They can't be using Darwinism for international relations. They are. Like, that's how far it's gone. So it's not just something which has consequences for epistemology. It has consequences for consciousness, because, for them, that's also very important. So what you'll find is prominent Darwinists like Francis Crick, the one who discovered the structure of a DNA. He went into, after, a lot of people don't know this, after his initial work in terms of life and the origin and all these types of things, he also went into consciousness. And he had this idea of how we can actually explain it from a naturalistic perspective. Okay, good. Anybody else? Yes, use the mic if you can.
It may be too early to ask this question, but would you say that it was the most destructive theory that's ever been put forward in terms of its impact on society as a whole, mankind as a whole, the amount of damage it's caused?
Yeah. I think that's a very good question. Inshallah, when we get into the different modules, we're going to go into these in a very deep way. So what you're referring to is social Darwinism. This is taking Darwin's theory and applying it, literally applying it on the ground and seeing what's happening. Now, Darwinists have a bunch of responses. So we're going to get into what are the claims that we're making. And I totally agree with what you're saying, that Darwinism is the most destructive scientific theory ever because of the consequences. And we will get into why that's the case, historically what happened, what is the classical Darwinist response to this, and why they're wrong as well. Because I wanted to do a 360 view, in the first presentation, I put together some slides, and inshallah I'll send this out to you guys afterwards, with just a little taster in each area. So one of the areas I wanted to touch upon today was eugenics. So Richard Weikart, he has this book, From Darwin to Hitler, Evolutionary Ethics, Eugenics and Racism in Germany. And what he basically says is Darwinism undermined traditional morality and the value of human life. Then evolutionary progress became the new moral imperative. This aided the advance of eugenics, which was overtly founded on Darwinian principles. And what you'll also find is that when it comes to ethics and morality, the same sort of thing happens. So you'll find people like Michael Roos saying in the Cambridge Handbook of Evolutionary Ethics that Darwinian theory shows that, in fact, morality is a function of feelings, but it shows also that we have and must have the illusion of objectivity. So they have a lot to say when it comes to this. And interestingly, when it comes to the defense that people usually make against Darwin, right? There's a bunch of defenses they actually make. Things like he didn't agree with social Darwinism, or his theory was descriptive, it was not prescriptive. Every single one of these things, inshallah, in the module when it comes to social Darwinism, we're going to refute on each particular point in a lot more detail, inshallah. Okay. Any other questions? What about why it matters? And then I have a question for you guys as well after this.
So I think it's important to study Darwinism, because I think the way that it's been taught to the most of us, growing up in school, was in a very uncritical and simplified way, and it leaves you with a lot of implications because it's taught in such a matter-of-fact manner. It poses a lot of questions that when you're young and you're growing up, you don't necessarily know how to deal with them. And I also think it links to the philosophy of science and understanding the fact that, under all theories, there are underlying assumptions, and that, the way that science is presented in school is not necessarily how science is and how it actually operates. So, I think the link to philosophy of science and understanding that aspect as well is very important whenever you want to study Darwinism more holistically.
Excellent. See, you've hit a point that I want to key off, right? And I want to ask a question now. I'm going to read out a statement and I want you guys to analyze it. This is a statement from Sir Monier Williams. He passed away, I think, over 100 years ago. And he's writing around the time of Wallace and Darwin. And I'm going to get into, obviously, those things in a bit more detail about who Wallace was. That's also very important. This statement says this: indeed, the Hindus were Spinozans 2,000 years before the birth of Spinoza, Darwinians centuries before the birth of Darwin, and evolutionists centuries before the doctrine of evolution had been accepted by the Huxleys of our time, and before any word like evolution existed in any language of the world. Okay, so the question is this. Here is a man who's writing at the time of Darwin. He's writing at the time of Huxley. So we have a professor at Oxford who is a historian. His speciality is Sanskrit. His speciality is Hinduism. And he is saying that the Hindus were Darwinian centuries before the birth of Darwin. Okay, so now the question I want to pose to you is, why were people like the Hindus of the Indus Valley civilization, people like Anaximander of the pre-Socratic philosopher, why were these people pushing out basically Darwinism over 2,000 years ago, hundreds of years ago? Why were these people and by the way, this isn't just the Indus Valley civilization and the Greeks. There's other ancient civilizations, and they are basically speaking about these evolutionary ideas, these Darwinian ideas. So the question is, why? This is really important philosophically.
Because evolution just means change over time. And I think that humans have observed change over time in different species since the beginning of writing. So it's no surprise that they would write these ideas down, and those ideas survive to this day.
You're partially correct, but not sufficiently correct. Okay? So there is a bigger problem here, philosophically. And I'll put it to you another way to make it easier. An alien ship lands here on Earth, and it lands on Earth 2,000 years ago. And the alien is quite sophisticated. The alien comes out, and the alien is a naturalist. They only believe in nature. Okay? Now, naturalism, I'm going to define, and you guys have to put this in your mind and keep it at the forefront of your mind, because we're going to be using this term a lot. Naturalism is the idea that only natural objects, so matter, time, space, energy, and the laws that govern them, that's it. Natural processes and natural things, matters, that's it. So the only thing that exists are the physical things and the physical processes. That's naturalism. That atheist, scientist, alien, walks out of the spaceship, and then he looks around and he sees this Earth. He sees everything, right? He sees the octopus, he sees the bees, he sees all these different human societies. How would he explain the origin of life and how life became this complex using his paradigm of naturalism? And this thought experiment, by the way, if you understand this thought experiment, you'll understand the whole of Darwinism. And you'll also answer the mystery for why the ancient Hindus and the ancient Greeks believed in Darwinism, or prototype of Darwinism.
Because he's limited to what he sees.
Maybe.
Sorry. Because based on his beliefs on naturalism, so he will find something that he can see around him. For example, if he believes that human being is originated from, let's say, animals or monkeys, whatever they believe, so that's what he can have access to, or his knowledge or information that he has about that thing. So, for example, his mind is limited. He cannot go beyond that. So that's why he links all the source of this creation, everything, to what he believes on.
I can see what you're saying, but there's more conceptual depth to this, and it's a bit tricky. It's a bit slippery. So it's not. You started in the right direction. It's to do with what he sees around him, and he can only make natural inferences. You're right there. But then let's take this a bit further. And I want someone from a philosophy background, and you, mashallah, brother, joined us a bit late. Maybe he can have a stab at it. It's a little bit slippery, but...
Yeah, I was thinking along the lines of just observing kind of like nature around them. And just, yeah, as you said, like making inferences based on that. So I'm not really sure what else would have led them to kind of have those.
Okay, maybe the brother there. You're saying the same thing that the other brother was saying. Yes.
Sorry, I just arrived. Can you give me a little bit of context? Just 1 second. Yeah.
You have a scientist that lands here on a spaceship.
Mm-hmm.
They land here on a spaceship, and they have to explain life. Where did all this life come from? They're a naturalist, which means they can only refer to matter and laws, processes. That's it. Space, time, energy, matter, and the laws that govern them. Those are the conceptual tools they have. Now, how can they come up with an explanation for life using just what I've given you right now?
Well, if they've only just landed on Earth, they might not be able to distinguish like things that are part of nature from things that are like sentient. For example,
No, say
like-
okay, let's just say they've been studying Earth for 100 years. They have a long life.
okay, so they've like seen, like they've read about Earth from. Well, I guess they'll have that preconceived like knowledge, and they'll sort of try and compare that to what they see, I guess.
They don't have any preconceived knowledge in this thought experiment. They just have a naturalism as a paradigm, and they have the world to look at. Why will they come up with some form of Darwinism? Which, by the way, Dawkins calls this universal Darwinism. He actually calls, there's actually a term in his book, A Devil's Chaplain, and it's also literally like, if you go on his official YouTube channel, he's still churning out. He released a video just maybe a few weeks ago. It's his last tour that he's doing around the world, and he thinks he's going to die or whatever. And he's still championing this idea of universal Darwinism. So I've given you the start point, which is an alien lands here and it's a naturalist. And I've given you the end point. The end point is universal naturalism, right? Why does this alien have to arrive here? Yes.
Because he doesn't have any other worldview, so he can only take into account things that he sees. So therefore, there's no room for God in this.
That's it.
Equation.
That's it. Okay, so now we're getting in the good direction. So that means something. Okay, is there design from his perspective?
No. Well, not by.
Yeah, there is.
Not by.
There is.
God.
There is design. Okay, there is design. Okay, there is design. Because remember, their language is filled with design. This isn't like a hidden thing. They all talk about good design. They all talk about design being a research heuristic. They all speak about function, purpose, all of that. But they say design is what?
Natural.
Natural, which means?
Yeah, through evolution and
Which means they say illusion.
illusion. Okay.
Remember, so you've now hit upon the crux of the issue. The crux of the issue is there's no God. So I have to explain this using the idea that there's no God. Do you know have a stab at it?
The thing is, they're essentially resorting to this measure, because if you're saying that you started up this whole thought experiment by saying that, when they come to the earth, they're not allowed to explain it in any supernatural terms. So the only thing that you can do is explain it in evolutionary terms, whether it's Darwinian evolution or whatever it may be, whatever type of evolution, because it's the most natural and reasonable inference on that worldview. But then the question would be, of course, how reasonable is it, and how far away from religion?
That's it.
Is it?
That's it. That's the mother of the issue. That's the mother of the issue. They have to. I don't remember your exact words. I think your words were this type of evolution or that type of. There has to be some form of evolution. Okay. Now, Francis Crick, and we're going to bring up Crick because he's very important for the discovery of the DNA structure, but also because Crick was a bit of a philosopher himself. He went beyond just speaking about science. He's speaking about other things to do with paradigms. Crick, being an atheist, he makes a statement, and I want you to think about this statement. Biologists must constantly keep in mind what they see was not designed, but rather evolved, right? And the one that finds him quite inspirational and refers to him is obviously Dawkins. Dawkins is being a much junior scientist when obviously they were both alive at the same time. And, Dawkins writes, given sufficient time, the non-random survival of hereditary entities will generate complexity, diversity, beauty, and an illusion of design so persuasive that it is almost impossible to distinguish from deliberate intelligent design. Do you guys notice what's going on here? Look at the last words. That it is almost impossible to distinguish from deliberate intelligent design. What Hijab was saying. Okay, if it's not this type of evolution, it's something else. If it's not this, it's that. So what he argues in The Blind Watchmaker, the famous book, which a lot of people credit him for the God delusion, but what made him really famous was The Selfish Gene and then The Blind Watchmaker. He says biology is the study of things that look designed, but it's an illusion of design. It is not actually design. And in another place in The Blind Watchmaker, he writes, natural selection is the blind watchmaker. Blind because it does not see ahead, does not plan consequences, has no purpose in view, yet the living results of natural selection overwhelmingly impress us with the appearance of design as if by a master watchmaker, impress us with the illusion of design and planning. Now, I want you to recognize something. This is not science. This is not science. This is what Kuhn called a paradigm. And the paradigm is naturalism. Okay, I'm going to make a statement. And by the way, in the beginning, I said we're going to do it in a Socratic way. Okay, so this is Speaker's Corner. I'm your opponent. Okay, you have to challenge me on these points, not just accept it. And whatever it is, don't hold back. Don't after the class come and no, now. Okay, the evidence from genetics, from biochemistry, from anatomy, from psychology, from bioinformatics, from the fossil record, from all of these different fields is irrelevant because Darwinism is true a priori. That is the way that science functions because of naturalism. That's the statement I'm making. And I want you guys to challenge that statement. No, it's science. No, we have studies. No, we have this fossil or that fossil. Who wants to challenge me? Oh, Chim, come on. No,
I kill you.
Yeah, good.
But what if someone says that, okay, why does it have to be Darwinism though? Or it could be another form of evolution. It doesn't have to be Darwinism. It can be or it could be something which is not necessarily evolution. Let's say, for example, Gould's punctuated equilibrium. But let's say, for instance, it's combined with some idea of spontaneous design or something like that. Like some of the new theories, they do talk about that. So they could say it is still conceivable, right?
Yep.
That you can have alternate theories to Darwinism on naturalistic grounds.
Yep. And I would actually concede to that. My point is that...
That was easy, wasn't it?
Yeah. So my point would be it's still some form of Darwinism, proto-Darwinism from the perspective is naturalistic. My point is that
then how are you defining Darwinism?
Yeah, so here I'm defining Darwinism as a naturalistic story of human origins or origin of the origin of life. The origin of life is going to involve nothing beyond the laws of nature and some sort of reductive mechanistic process. This is why you can call it proto-Darwinism. Fine, don't call it Darwinism.
So is it? Let's say, for instance, do we assume that there's evolution with Darwinism?
Yeah.
So couldn't one say that, okay, well, there are some theories of like spontaneous design, which are not evolution. And let's say, for example, even though these are very uncommon theories and very unpopular theories, but let's say, for instance, like a worm.
Okay, good. Okay, just on that point. Yeah. As soon as you introduce something that's irreducibly complex, meaning it hasn't evolved, the Darwinist will automatically say to you that opens the door to God. It opens the door to something divine, and we cannot allow that.
Say that. Okay, well, it's just you know how in the beginning they say abio-genesis.
Okay,
you know you've got like
something
happening that transforms chemistry into biology, right? Say that. They're saying, for example, that on naturalism, you can still conceive of multiple abiogeneses. So, for instance, like, okay, the worm was created with this reaction and this other thing, like...
But it's all naturalistic.
Yeah.
And
But let's say that's not still evolutionary, though.
no, okay, so evolution is a step-by-step process. The steps may be longer than others. It's still step-by-step process. There is no mousetrap that comes together in one go.
But what if they say that it's still conceivable in naturalism for you to have that?
Yeah.
So, for example, like if they say that if it's conceivable to have abio-genesis on a naturalistic framework,
Yeah.
then it's conceivable to have multiple
It is.
geneses.
Okay, it is conceivable to do that, but that's still evolution. It's still evolution.
Why?
Because it is something that doesn't come in one fiat. It doesn't come as one irreducible product.
What if they say it does? It's moving
No, but
from
the problem is, as soon as they say it does, they actually have to explain it in some sort of divine way. Because if you have a functioning, like think of it like a mousetrap.
Yeah.
You get the wood, you get the latch. I'm using Michael Behe's example here. You get the wood, you get the latch, you get the catch, you get, the mouse comes in, whatever. You get a functioning whole.
But what if they say, like, if that were true, they would say, if that were true, then abiogenesis itself would need a divine explanation.
Exactly, which is why they go back to naturalism. Now, let me just give you an example of what you just said about there could be multiple abiogenesis events. That's an excellent point. Why do they say there's only one abiogenesis event? Why did it only happen once? Before I get into the answer, I want someone to explain to me the alien that's landed here on Earth, it decides there's only one origin. Why?
So that you can have one common ancestor and explain all of life in one go?
That's one explanation, but there's another reason why.
Because he doesn't want you to... There's a God. So, because he wants to close all the ways to God.
No. It's not got to do with God. It's got to do with probabilities. There's the physicist.
Yeah, we can say that it's the chance of life happening is so small that it must be one.
There you go. Origination event has to be close to 0. That's it. Because it's extremely hard for them to explain the origin of life. So they have to reduce its probabilities to the first, one origin. That thing has to be so low in terms of probability. Because it's so low in probability, they say it's just an extraordinary event. It's just a one-off thing. It cannot happen again. Sometimes, because the first cell or the first self-replicating molecule or whatever they call it is so complex, it led some people to refer to a theory which I've referred to a few times for those of you who see my content. What's that theory that Crick came up with?
Is he primordial ooze or something like that? I'm not.
Directed panspermia.
Oh, okay.
I'm sure you guys have seen me speaking about this before.
The space burn theory.
Something like that. So basically what Crick did is this. Crick wrote a book called Life Itself. In the book, there's 2 ways you can explain the origin of life. The origin of life started on this planet from chemical to biological. So you had inorganic to organic. But crossing that bridge and the complexity and how complex DNA is and all this. So that's a huge problem, how you get from inorganic to organic. So his solution, potential solution, was panspermia. That actually life was sent to this planet from another advanced civilization in another part of the universe, and they sent life down. This sounds like sci-fi, but this is a Nobel Prize winning atheist evolutionary scientist. Why? Because for them to explain the development of life, they need life to be there in the first place. Remember, Darwinian evolution starts when you have life already.
This is the same guy that discovered the double helix.
Yeah. Directed panspermia. Yeah, that's his theory. Now, why did he come up with this theory? Because life is so complex. Now, there's only 2 ways they do it. Abiogenesis, which is it arrived in this life, or the second one's panspermia. Dawkins himself, when he was pushed about the complexity of life, he referred to directed panspermia, right? Then he was embarrassed and he tried to backtrack, but it got too late. Yeah. This is what he says directly about the origin of life. We can deal with the unique origin of life by postulating a very large number of planetary opportunities. Once that initial stroke of luck has been granted, and the entropic principle most decisively grants it to us, natural selection takes over, and natural selection is not a matter of luck. Long story short, what he's basically saying is this. He's saying, yes, it's a very complex whatever, but we just need that one miracle. We just need that one, in his words, initial stroke of luck. Now, the problem here is, why do you think it's one? And the reason why you think it's one is what you said, because they have to reduce the probabilities. If someone says, I became a millionaire, and it's like, oh, how did you become a millionaire? Oh, I was playing the lottery. And then hijab's like, you do something haram or whatever, yeah? But then I'm like, no, I didn't win the lottery. I didn't win 1 million once. I won 1,000 times 1,000 pounds each. You're going to be like, that makes no sense. It's easier to be a millionaire by winning the lottery once, as it is to win the lottery 1,000 times, winning 1,000 pounds each. That's why they cannot conceptually, as a naturalist, push more than one origin of life. When did the origin of life happen, by the way, according to them?
4 billion years?
Yeah. 4 something billion years, 4.3, whatever it is they come up with, right? How the hell do they know that? Why are they assuming there's one origin of life? Why? Lamarck, John Baptiste Lamarck, before Darwin, he believed in multiple origins. But Darwinists today, they will fight on that hill. They will die on that hill. There's one origin. Why? Simply to do with probabilities. Nothing to do with evidence. Absolutely nothing to do with evidence.
It's like Occam's razor.
Yes. I should have said that term earlier. It's Occam's razor. It is simply the simplest explanation. Now, what the alien would do is this. The alien would say, octopus, bumblebee, blade of grass, elephants, going back, there must have been lesser forms of life and then one. They'll make a tree of life, which is why Anaximander and the ancient Hindus of the Indus Valley civilization, they came up with a proto-Darwinian theory. That's why they came up with it.
Question, why can't it be the other way around? So rather than the origin of life being the profound event, but rather the location where the life can emerge is what has a low probability. So basically, it's not that life emerging has a low probability, but the Earth is the special location where it can take place. And actually, life is very common, but it's just that Earth is perfectly situated. It's got the right constitution of everything.
Brilliant question. That's simply to do with the environmental factors that we've discovered to show that life is very improbable.
Okay.
That's why. Now, I want to read out a statement by an evolutionary biologist to you guys, Scott Todd. And I want you to just think about this. And all of this I'll send out to you afterwards in the WhatsApp group, inshallah, right? Even if all the data points to an intelligent designer, such a hypothesis is excluded from science because it is not naturalistic. What does that tell you about the way that they think? Is it scientific or is it philosophical?
It's philosophical.
So do.
What do you guys think?
It's philosophical.
It's pure philosophy. It's pure philosophy. Now, Michael Roos, he is considered the Neville Chamberlain of evolution. This is exactly what, and Hijab can tell us who Neville Chamberlain was, maybe a lot for those of you who don't know. He's basically a coward before Churchill, right? So in The God Delusion, Neville Chamberlain, he's being described, he's being likened to Michael Roos. And Dawkins and Michael Roos don't like each other. Michael Roos recounts an incident that happened with him when he was debating evolutionists years ago. And one of the evolutionists said, you have a religion like us. And he said, no, I don't. He went home, he thought about it, and he actually realized, wait a minute, actually that's right. And many years later, he wrote the book Evolution as Religion, because it's way more than just science. It is philosophy. It is a philosophical perspective. And the perspective that it is naturalism. Now, the clearest example that I want to give you is a Harvard biologist, Richard Lewontin. And again, he's an atheist. And this is the most explicit statement because these Darwinists, right at the higher ends, they discuss things that they do not want the public to know. But some of them let it slip. And some of them, when they let it slip, they're attacked by the others. Oh, they don't really know what they're talking about. But they recognize, wait a minute, this doesn't add up. So Richard Lewontin, being an atheist evolutionary biologist, he's the most candid when it comes to this. Our willingness to accept scientific claims that are against common sense is the key to an understanding of the real struggle between science and the supernatural. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of its failure to fulfill many of its extravagant promises of health and life, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated just-so stories, because we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. This is so important, right? He's basically saying we have, before we look at genetics, before we look at anatomy, physiology, linguistics, consciousness, anything, we have a commitment to naturalism. He continues, it is not that the methods and institutions of science somehow compel us to accept a material explanation of the phenomenal world, but on the contrary, that we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and a set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying to the uninitiated. Moreover, materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door. This is the most explicit statement you will find, and you will not find other biologists saying this. If you ask Richard Dawkins, is it naturalism? He'll say it's science. You ask Lawrence Krauss, it's science. If you speak to Jerry Coyne, it's science. P.Z. Myers, science. They will not say this. Very few evolutionary biologists, and these are not people with a religious bone in their body, they've admitted it is not that. Now, there is a suffocation academically of people who speak out against the fact that Darwinism is a philosophy. It's not just a science. And the philosophy precedes the science. Okay? This is very important. Before the science, you know, Kuhn with his ideas of paradigm shifts and the way that your theories color the data, this is exactly that. This is a classic paradigm which is governing it. Now, Thomas Nagel, he's an atheist philosopher. He published a book, again, this is published by Oxford University, like Michael Roos's book, and his book, Mind and Cosmos, where he delves into Darwinism, right? Before he started getting attacked by the Darwinists, he was a respected atheist philosopher, right? But in that book, he went to town on Darwinism and the absurd sort of claims that it has. He says, whatever one may think about the possibility of a designer, the prevailing doctrine that the appearance of life from dead matter and its evolution through accidental mutation and natural selection to its present forms has involved nothing but the operation of physical law cannot be regarded as unassailable. It is an assumption governing the scientific project rather than a well-confirmed scientific hypothesis. It is an assumption governing the scientific project. It is a philosophical assumption. This is what's key. It is a philosophical assumption. So all of the data, all of the things that you actually want to point out, you know, we have this part of genetics that doesn't fit, this fossil's found in the wrong place, this thing has happened or that thing has happened, it makes zero difference. And the reason why it makes zero difference is because conceptually, the data is irrelevant. Now, if someone turns around and says to you, that's not true, give them the alien example, the alien spaceship example. And this has actually come from the horse's mouth himself, Dawkins. Dawkins wants to pretend there's science, and he pretends philosophy is not important. And he pretends it's because of science we have all of this. Yet he shot himself in the foot multiple times. One of the times he shot himself in the book is his book, Devil's Chaplain. He speaks about universal Darwinism. And that's the idea. Wherever life is in the universe, it will be Darwinian. Why? Because there is no other possibility. For the same reason that Hijab was saying. There is no possibility. It has to be this evolution or that evolution, slow, fast, gradual, but it has to be some form of naturalistic evolutionary theory. Now, even today, like I said a few weeks ago, his video that he uploaded on his channel, he's being interviewed by some guy, and he's again talking about life elsewhere in the universe. And he says, well, if there is life elsewhere in the universe, it's going to be Darwinian. Then why are you bloody talking about genetics and anatomy and all these things? And you're pretending as if the theory is an outcome. The theory precedes and colors and selects and deselects what data is relevant, what data is not relevant. Okay? So naturalism is the reason why Darwinism is not challenged. It cannot be challenged. Now, I want to get into two terms which are really important. One is philosophical naturalism. One is methodological naturalism. Okay? Philosophical naturalism is simply naturalism. It's simply a belief. It's a position. There are only these concepts in the world, physical entities and processes. That's it. We have time, space, matter, energy, and the laws that govern them. That's it. Methodological naturalism is there may be a God, there may be a soul, or may not be a soul or God. But when we are doing science, we are not going to refer to a God or a soul. We're going to stick to naturalistic explanations and see how far we get. Okay, so now you've heard the distinctions between the two. Can a theist be a philosophical naturalist? No. Do you have a consensus there?
Yeah.
Can a theist be a methodological naturalist?
Yes.
Okay. Here's another question. Should we accept methodological naturalism or should we reject it?
We've got a higher paradigm. So we can we use the Quran as our criterion above everything else. So that's for a Muslim. That's the we have to stick to that particular criterion.
Okay. So on this we'll touch upon in a few times. Muslim academics actually disagree. Some say we should reject methodological naturalism. Some say we should accept it, but we should make it clear that science is limited in that regard. For example, do we believe in the soul?
Yes.
Now, the soul is very hard to define. Someone may say, let's use the word consciousness or whatever. However, do we believe the mind is the brain at work? The mind is simply broken down, is physical processes, neurological processes. Do we believe that?
Airbags.
Maybe explain why. Why we cannot accept that.
Obviously, we believe in an interplay between, like from the Islamic paradigm, an interplay between the soul, what's referred to also as al-qalb, which is translated as the heart, and also the aql, and which is translated as the intellect. And obviously, the brain has, some relevance here. It's definitely in the mix, but it's not the only thing there. So methodological naturalism, the problem with it, we're using it, is sometimes it stops us from being able to take the more intuitive explanation. It actually it's actually a limit.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, if, for example, we have to now try and find some kind of, especially on the big topics, like a theory of consciousness, for example, we have to try and find some naturalistic explanation for that which is not even naturalistic in the first place. So that becomes unintuitive to do that.
Yeah.
So I think on some areas you can employ methodological naturalism
Yeah.
without much controversy.
Yeah.
But on other areas where it's like, you know, where the principle of effective causality is actually, so this would be my view. Like I feel like that where the principle of effective causality, which is that something bereft of a quality cannot produce it.
Yep.
If that is removed from, or it becomes unintuitive to use methodological naturalism in that regard, then it's unjustifiable to use methodological naturalism. For example, on the issues of consciousness or the issues of abio-genesis,
Yes.
as an example.
Yes.
But whereas it's not, for example, in situations where it's like medical, yeah, like stuff like that, you don't actually need an immediate, I'm not saying that obviously ultimately we believe everything is supernatural, but we don't need an immediate, we don't need an immediate supernatural explanation.
Okay.
That we can go for that.
Excellent. Very good. Now we're going to go back to the origin of species. Darwin published The Origin of Species in 1859. He published it alongside someone known as Wallace, Alfred Russel Wallace. What you would find in the history books, and even as late as the 1990s, you will find academics saying not Darwin's theory of evolution. They say Darwin and Wallace's theory. Now he's whitewashed. He's finished. Why? Is because he, independently with Darwin, came up with the same theory. They both met up. They collaborated on it. And in the early days, it was Darwin and Wallace's theory. All the Victorian literature, what does it say? Darwin and Wallace, Darwin and Wallace, Darwin and Wallace. Wallace started having doubts related to naturalism. And that's why he got taken out. He got deselected. He started doubting naturalism. It's so important because we are told lies about Darwinism from the beginning. We are told the only people doubting Darwinism and its efficacy are the religious clergy. That's not true. Paleontologists started having doubts. The ones who study the actual fossils, to the point that Darwin had to respond to them in an entire chapter in his book, The Origin of Species. And what he had to respond to was the fact that the fossil record doesn't show gradualism. It shows jagged, punctuated equilibrium or whatever they came up with afterwards. But you have stasis, things remain the same. Then you get massive changes. Doesn't add up, right? Naturalism, and we're going to get into the fossil record when we get into the science of it. This is like a 360 view. So Alfred Russel Wallace, his doubt was actually related to the capacity that human beings have. Now, Darwin, if he was in this room, he would consider every single one of us to be a savage, or at least from that origin, until we were domesticated under European environments, except for yourself. You'd be half a savage because you are German, right? Half German. So you'd be... Interestingly enough, the doubt began by Alfred Russel Wallace thinking, wait a minute, our cognitive abilities in the environments that human beings are running in a primitive way and stabbing each other and living in a very, brutish Hobbesian lifestyles, right? If we're to take someone from Latin America, from the jungle, and bring them to Europe and civilize them, their cognitive abilities are not on par with their environment in the Amazon. They can compete with their European counterparts. Their capacity for language, for abstract thought, is way beyond what's required for them to be running around in jungles. So he started thinking Darwinism cannot explain the mind. It cannot explain our cognitive abilities. And that was the beginning of his doubt. We're going to get into Wallace later and what he did, but that was his fundamental doubt. That's why he fell out with Darwin. and that's why they had to whitewash him later on. And they, even today, he's being sidelined. They don't want to talk about Wallace, because Wallace is the key which breaks that entire story. The story of Darwin's opposition was only religious folk. No, it was the co-collaborator of the theory, right? And then you'll get into all the other paleontologists that disagreed with him and all the rest. Okay, now you said we cannot accept methodological naturalism. There are three consequences of methodological naturalism. There are three consequences. The first consequence is you can never have independent human ancestry a priori, or any form of multiple origins. All life has to be connected. That's one of the multi-regional hypothesis. Very good point you raised. That would still fit within the tree of life because they all have one origin. It's just that humans evolved in different places and they evolved similar capabilities. So we had what they call convergent evolution, but it's still one origin. Okay. So the first point to know is naturalism, methodological naturalism, means there is only one origin. They cannot be separate ancestry. A priori. Before the evidence, before they look at genetics, before they look at naturalism, before they look at anything, there has to be one. Number two, design is an illusion. We already went over why. Design has to be illusion. The third one, purpose, meaning, morality, ethics, all of these things are illusory as well. Okay, this is what I used in my debate as well, in my debates when I'm talking to these atheists. Do you remember back in the day we used to have the VHS tape? Some of these guys won't remember. I think me and Hijab and Saki will remember. We had the VHS tapes, right? So you'd put it in your player. Then what you would do is you would play a particular video. Then you'd put it back in. You'd press reverse and it'd reverse. And then you play the same movie again. Stephen Jay Gould, an evolutionary biologist, he gives the example that if the tape of life, you are to rewind it and replay it every single time, you will get completely different species, completely different morality. Everything will be different. Why? Natural selection plus random mutations, right? That's all they have. They believe in randomness, okay? Now, we're going to get into randomness philosophically and why that's a very slippery term, and it's actually quite elusive, and they shouldn't be using it the way that they actually use it. But nonetheless, there's nothing about the morality that we currently hold, the values that we currently hold, or the purpose that we currently believe to be important that has any value. According to Darwinism, and Dawkins is very explicit about this, the ultimate rationale of life is to pass on your DNA, preserve your genes. That is the ultimate basis of morality. And your existential questions are irrelevant. The real meaning of life is that. That's the closest meaning of life you can get. Now we're going to get into evolutionary ethics, and we're going to get into kin selection theory, expanding circle, reciprocal altruism. They come up with all these explanations for why morality is an illusion. We're going to do a separate module on that, because I'm sure some of you have seen that the evolutionary ethics is a completely different area. Evolutionary epistemology, that's a completely different area. These are all separate areas. However, the three things I mentioned, which is currently the most important for us as Muslims when we're dealing with Darwinists? Is it to do with purpose, meaning, value, morality? Is it to do with ancestry? Or is it to do with design being illusion? Or no, they're all important. Which is the most important?
Is it design?
Okay, you believe it's design. Who believes universal common ancestry is more problematic? There's three things I gave. Okay, let's do it by vote. Who believes design is the biggest problem? Who believes universal common ancestry or human chimp ancestry or these things? Okay, who believes purpose, meaning? Okay, Again, I'm going to put forward an argument. The argument I'm going to put forward is this. The biggest problem that we have is design. Because they use Darwinism to undermine God. If God doesn't exist, then universal common ancestry is a logical deduction of naturalism. Let me repeat that. It's a bit of a mouthful, right? If there is no God, right, naturalism has a logical deduction, and that is universal common ancestry. Do you guys understand that point? This is why I'm going to give you guys a beautiful thought experiment. Okay? Allah says in the Quran, the likeness of Adam is like Isa. So what's the explanation here? What's similar?
Kun fayakun.
The miraculous creation.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So let's have a thought experiment. Okay? All of us here, we all decide to make a spaceship. And we decide to make a time machine. We make a time machine, and this time machine can go back in any period in history. Then what we do is all of us here, we're interested in polemics, we're interested in speaking to Christians, we're interested in all this, right? So what we do is we all get the world's leading scientists, geneticists, paleontologists, whatever, right? We get all of the leading biologists in the world. We put them in a room and we say to them, we are going to send you back to Bethlehem 2,000 years ago. You have to go to a village, right? I made a mistake in the thought experiment. We don't tell them it's Bethlehem. We know it's Bethlehem. All of us here. We know it's Bethlehem. We tell them, you're going back to a village. We're not telling them which village it is. And we tell them, you need to go in the village and you need to make a genealogical tree, okay, of the relationships in the village. So we take these scientists, they're honest scientists, but they believe in naturalism. We send them in the time capsule. They come out in Bethlehem. Everybody is there and they're shocked. Who the heck are these scientists, right? They can't speak the language. The scientists go and they grab everyone and they take blood samples. They take DNA. They take saliva. They take every experiment you can look at in terms of genetics, right? They take all of that data and they come back to the year 2025. And when they come back, we say to them, okay, go ahead, make a tree. They make a tree. While they were there, they had to take a sample of every single Homo sapien in that village. So did they take the sample of someone important? Isa alayhi salam, Jesus. They took his DNA, they took the DNA of Maryam, they took the DNA of all of the family and everybody else. Then they made a tree. And they made this tree and they said, person 005 is this. Person 007 is connected to this. They made a tree. The person of Jesus, according to the scientists, when they make this genealogical tree, who is the mother? Mary. Then they link him and they say, who is the father? Who do they say the father is? Do they say because they don't know, they just took the DNA of Jesus. We know that they did, okay? Who do they say is the father? Do they say he has no father? His genome shows ATCG, just like everyone else, right? 6 billion letters. Who is the father, according to them? Remember, they're atheists, they're naturalists. They don't know that they're dealing with Jesus. Who do they say the father is?
Joseph?
They point to someone in the family. If we turn around and we say to them, that subject X008, whatever, has no father, what are they going to say?
That's not possible.
They're going to say no. We're going to say yes. They're going to say, we have genetic data, we have scientific data, we have proof, we have evidence, we have homology. What can we do scientifically to prove to them, and the time machine's broken, we can't go back and show them that that was Jesus, whatever. What can we do to show them that this subject, X008, whatever, doesn't have a father? Scientifically, what can we do?
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Likewise, what can we do to show that the origin of life, the beginning of life on this planet, was not naturalistic? There was something non-natural. What can we do scientifically? Nothing. What can we do to show that Homo sapiens, our lineage, is not linked to, say, Homo erectus or not linked to other primates? What can we do scientifically?
Nothing.
Absolutely nothing. It is a logical deduction of naturalism that all of life is connected and there has to be one origin of life simply due to probabilities. There's no other way.
They made their mind up before they conducted it.
They made up their mind. This is why I gave you the statement of the Oxford Sanskrit scholar, Professor Monier Williams. The Hindus were Darwinians 2,000 years ago. Why? Because Anaximander, the Greek, and the ancient Hindus and the others, and probably the Egyptians and probably the Mesopotamians and whatever else, all these different people, probably the Chinese as well, they all, when you look at the world naturalistically and you assume there's no God, you want to give a naturalistic explanation, that's the only thing you can do. If you postulate two origins of life, it's like saying I became a millionaire and I won the lottery twice. If you postulate humans have a separate origin to others, you're postulating another lottery event. There has to be one. It's a logical necessity. It is required. This is why...
say that. Would you go as far as to say it's a logical necessity, or would you say that it's just most probable to be like?
No, it's a logical necessity. There's no other way. Because of the way that they think. They apply Occam's razor. Science goes with the simplest explanations. And if you are to postulate another origin, you have to say, by the way, there was not...
No, but is it possible though?
No, it's impossible.
Why is it impossible?
It's impossible.
Like, say, for example, on their paradigm, they say, look, we understand your lottery example, but is it possible to get two people that win like, £1,000 each time?
Okay, if we apply Occam's razor, those probabilities will be shaved off.
Yeah, I get that, but would it be necessary?
Yes, it's a logical deduction. If you start with naturalism, right, and you're not to apply anything else, you can't go back 4 billion years.
But what if they ask you, like, in your lottery example?
Yeah.
Lottery ticket 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You said it's easier to, for example, get one lottery ticket for £1 million than, let's say, whatever it may be for 1,000 each or whatever, yeah? What if they say, okay, but is it still possible for you to get that many, maybe not 1,000 tickets, but let's just say for the sake of argument, 10 100,000 ones.
Okay, so...
Or let's say 2 500,000 ones.
Because we can say it's possible. But if someone is to simply use naturalism, use Bayesian probabilities, use Occam's razor, use these things, that's the only solution you're going to come up with.
No, I get that probability, but if they will still say, would you go as far as to say it's a necessity though?
Okay, so this is...
Not on the naturalist.
So this is how I would put it. It is a logical necessity that all of life evolves naturalistically. That's a logical necessity. The probabilities of the origin of life, they will always say it's close to zero.
Yes.
They'll never say it's zero because then what's happened?
They've eliminated their own...
It's impossible to have life.
Yeah.
So they will say... So I think it's very good you did this because you've clarified it. It is a logical necessity that life evolved naturalistically. If you put a gun to their head and you say, is there some remote possibility that there's two origins and although it's close to zero, they will say that's a highly improbable event, right?
Yeah.
But the way I'm using the term is if something is so highly improbable, it's basically impossible.
Scientifically impossible.
That's good.
Yeah.
Scientifically impossible. Logically, it's
Not
highly improbable.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's good you clarified that. So the alien example and Isa alayhi salam, the time example, do you guys understand that? Was that example clear?
Yep.
There is nothing you can do to show it the other way. Okay, now we're going to get into something very important. Okay. This is a conceptual catalyst. This thing will get your mind blowing and your juices flowing, right? You will understand, wow, this is what's going on, right? Evolution as a concept is so broad, the tent is so big. Literally anything, the way Philip Johnson explains it is, anything other than 6-day literal creation can fall into evolution. Like that's how broad it's become as an idea. So evolution as a concept is different to Darwinism. We know that. The point here to ask is this. The point here to ask is, why did it take off in 1859?
Would you say that, when the Enlightenment period, there was a whole project to try and exclude religion from explanation? So, for example, Immanuel Kant, like he's trying to find morality without a God. So they just super extended this to the scientific enterprise.
Yeah.
And that's where they kind of...
So the way that you've the naturalistic backdrop of that time period, you've captured it. That's the feeling. They wanted a reason, right? Darwin came along and he gave them that naturalistic origin. But the point is, there's something that Darwin did, because Darwin says this in his book. And so does Huxley and so do others. They say evolution is an old concept. It's an old concept. The tree of life even goes back to John Baptiste Lamarck. It goes back before even Darwin. What did Darwin do? There's only one thing he did. There's only one contribution he's made to mankind. What is that?
Is it natural selection?
Natural selection. He, for the first time, gave a naturalistic origin. He gave a naturalistic, reductive, mechanical explanation, theoretical explanation, which is why all of these evolutionary ideas, which the Greeks had, which the Hindus had, which interestingly, even Renaissance thinkers going back, they had these evolutionary ideas. It was like there's a robot and he plugged in the electricity. That's what happened. This is why we have to challenge the mechanism. Now, let me give you the structure, okay? Now, me and Hijab, mashallah, back in the day, David would debate, and other times we used to come up with the sit down and strategies of if you're going to debate this path. Let me give you the logical path of tackling Darwinism. The logical path of tackling Darwinism is this. Do not go down the route of challenging universal common ancestry, because we cannot do that until we tackle the beast. Darwinism has been used to justify atheism. Atheism's logical deduction is universal common ancestry and Darwinism. It's like a positive feedback loop. What we do is that we take out the legs. If we can smash the mechanism, if we can show that the mechanism is inefficient, if we can show fundamentally the reason why the mechanism keeps surviving is because it relies on the philosophy, not the science. And the philosophy precedes the science. The science is a veneer. The wall, the foundation is the philosophy, is naturalism. Then, when you've ripped open that scandal, when you've ripped open this hidden truth, then the possibility of non-naturalistic explanations are there. So we can say something like this. The origin of life, the origin of Adam, the origin of Isa, Jesus, once God is accepted as an explanation that God is real, right? God hasn't been undermined through Darwinism. Then Allah says, kun fayakun, be and it is, and what do you have? You can have an origin of life. You can have another Adam. You can have another Jesus. You can have these. All of these things are possible if there is a God. If there's no God, these things are not possible. So the first thing you have to smash is the Darwinian mechanism. And this is why, brothers and sisters, this is so important. They will always defend Darwinism by conflating it with evolution. Anyone here that's taken antibiotics? Have you taken antibiotics? Yeah. The bacteria that if you apply antibodies to them, they will go through the evolution. If you have the corn that we eat today, this is not the corn that you find in the wild. We have domesticated this corn through artificial selection. That's evolution. We do this with animals. We do this with, breeding pigeons, different types of pigeons.
Selective breeding.
Selective breeding. In fact, this is what the slave owners were doing in America. They were choosing, people of certain anatomical features and saying, okay, this person breeds with this person. What they want to do is, you want evidence for Darwinism? You want evidence for the mechanism? Let me show you something. Don't you eat corn? Yes, you do. Well, that's not the corn you get in the wild. We actually have to selectively breed that corn. We selectively breed dogs. We do this, we do that. Yeah, but that's irrelevant. That is not the evidence for Darwinism. This is formally known as the fallacy of equivocation. This is the same fallacy which Aaron Ra used in his debate against me. This is the same fallacy that many academics who are dealing with the issue, they will recognize. Sometimes it's defined as microevolution and macroevolution, right? Sometimes it's defined as these two things, but it's not. It's way more than that. Okay, I've said a mouthful there.
Have they ever discovered, on this point, have they ever observed any species moving from one to another?
What do you mean?
Do they ever so for example, transitions from one species to another species, has that ever been observed?
Okay, so there's two things to say about this. Number one, the definition of species is extremely slippery. Mm-hmm. Number two, if we take one of the definitions of species, then that's something that we can see amongst animals. We can see this in dogs, we can see this in cats, we can see, okay, let's define this as being a species being different to that. So the domestic house cat is linked to the other type of cat, the big cats, right? Leopards or whatever. But even that does not justify the mechanism. That just shows a certain genealogical tree of these cats. You see, Darwin's idea was the origin of species. I'll give you an example from The Blind Watchmaker, and this is very, very important. The Blind Watchmaker, Richard Dawkins, in The Blind Watchmaker and Climbing Mount Improbable, he gives the explanation of how did bats evolve wings. And then he goes into this idea that maybe there was a rodent-like creature, squirrel-like creature, and it was jumping off these certain heights. When it did, it broke its neck, it died. But if it's a certain height, it carried on doing it, and maybe it grew 5% of a wing, and then he has his own thing.
Yeah, and the other ones became humans.
Yeah, this, I was just... it is funny. In fact, my biggest doubt, and I can see why Hijab's laughing, because my biggest doubts about Darwinism and how ridiculous it was began not when I was reading critiques of Darwinism, but when I was reading their own books. I was like, is that it? Is that it? Is that your idea? Natural selection plus random mutations can explain how you got from particles to purpose, from monad to man. It's literally, it's mind-blowing. Now, Philip Johnson, he's one of the pioneers of the critiques of Darwinism, right? He challenged Dawkins to a debate. Dawkins basically said something, to the effect of, you're not, I don't want to give you credibility by debating me, all that nonsense here. But he says, look, the fundamental point here is, number one, there's no evidence for these type of stories. These are called just so stories by other evolutionary biologists, as in Rudyard Kipling's ideas of, how the tiger got its stripes or the elephant got its long trunk or whatever. These are just made up stories. The point is, where did the bats come from in the first place? Where did organisms come from in the first place? Where did body forms come from? Where did DNA come from? What the Darwinists do is they selectively choose a trait and they try and tell you a story about it. And you'll often find in documentaries. I was looking into the works of Raymond Tallis, right? And he's an atheist, biologist, and he's also a philosopher. He gives a ridiculous example. He has a book called Aping Mankind, a fantastic book. I recommend it. He gives a really ridiculous example, right? So what he does is he gives the example that evolutionary psychologists give for color preference. So men like the color blue, women like the color red. So the evolutionary biologists, they came up with this idea. When we were in the early evolutionary environment, when we were cavemen, then the men who were predisposed or had the genetic predisposition to like the color blue were more likely to survive because they go out to the watering hole and it's blue. And so they should, they're more likely to have adaptive functions. The sky is blue and so on and so forth. Why do women like the color red? Well, they cut meat, they're foraging and, they're collecting berries. And then Raymond Tallis goes, well, guys, that's a European-centric thing. Men liking the color blue and women liking the color red, this is a European-centric thing. And in fact, it's not even European-centric because during the Victorian times, it was women who liked the color blue and men who sometimes preferred the color pink. So these stories, they come out of the paradigm of naturalism because naturalism's true. Why are we like this? Why are we like that? I was reading one of the most ridiculous things in The Selfish Gene. The Selfish Gene is a great fairy tale, right? Think about the love of a mother. It's such a beautiful love, right? But look at what Dawkins says about this. I am treating a mother as a machine programmed to do everything in its power to propagate copies of the genes.
Like he's got the same opinion as you.
On him. I need to read this. I am treating a mother as a machine. My wife's going to see this. It's fine. It's fine. I am treating a mother as a machine programmed to do everything in its power to propagate copies of the genes which ride inside it. Oh. Since you and I are humans who know what it is like to have conscious purposes, it is convenient for me to use language of purpose as a metaphor in explaining the behavior of survival machines. Love, empathy, altruism, all of these are collective fictions, simply to delude you to propagate your genes. And I want you to just think about this because sociologically, Darwinism has the most absurd claims because each one of us, we do not act in a way like, I am not conducting this class because it's going to maximize my fitness in any way. I am not say, for example, I adopt a child. The explanation from a genetic point of view and everything breaking it down to genes and reciprocal altruism and all this type of stuff, none of it adds up. And this is why people like David Stowe, who's an atheist philosopher of science, in his book, Darwinian Fairy Tales, he says Darwinists like to blame the facts of altruism rather than blaming their own theory. Like they have a habit of blaming the facts and calling altruism a problem. Like the very premise they begin with is true altruism cannot exist. Now, in a famous debate between John Lennox and Richard Dawkins, Lennox quoted Richard Dawkins in terms of his book, A River Out of Eden, a Darwinian view of life, right? So Lennox said, you're here talking about morality and religion being evil and this and this and this and all this, right? He said, but you do not believe in these things. You believe these things are illusory. So he quoted to him his own book, A Darwinian View of Life, River Out of Eden. He said, the universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is at bottom. No design, no purpose, no good, no evil, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. Dawkins' response was, yeah, but I'm telling people we should rebel against our genes. What do you think Lennox's classic answer was? It was a classic answer, and you really stomped him.
We who? Or no?
We who?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's saying we, as in I, and I'm telling my atheists or whatever, I'm telling people you have to rebel against your genes. What's the problem with that? Why is he being incoherent?
He's appealing to a mind, or
I'm gonna refer to my best student, my mashallah, Rahmatullah Nuruz, my first student that I got 2014. He's my favorite. So 12 years, mashallah, he's made me proud. You better give me a good answer now.
So it doesn't follow the process of naturalism.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Why? Good, but why?
Because of random order, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So it doesn't process due in the process of naturalism.
Yeah.
The due selection of naturalism.
Because
The statement is incoherent by itself.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Where is the free choice? Jazakallah khair. Where is the free choice? So Lennox gave him a classic example, a classic answer from a naturalistic point of view, which is, what is it that is rebelling? They don't believe in the soul. They don't believe in the immaterial mind. They believe consciousness is the mind at work, right? So he's like, what is it that is rebelling? DNA creates us. Dawkins' entire narrative in his book, The Selfish Gene, which has become their kalima, that's become their blind watchmaker thesis. Genes created us mind and body. We are survival machines. We are machines for the replicators, which are within us, and we are blindly programmed vehicles. So he's asking the question, what is it inside us that rebels? Are you referring to free will? Like you said, naturalism, it doesn't fit under naturalism. So these are some of the ridiculous consequences for Darwin's theory. Now, also something else I have to explain. I said today's session is on the 360 view of Darwinism. Okay? The 360 view of Darwinism. Now, we spoke about many different elements. We spoke about common ancestry, we spoke about purpose, we spoke about these things. Now I want to speak about something big, politics. Okay? We have now Darwinian explanations for international relations. I think you did international relations or politics, right? What are some of the theories that we have? We have the realist theory, we have the liberal theory, we have the constructivist theory, we have these theories, right? What is the explanation, say, from a realist perspective for why a state acts in the way that it acts?
Self-interest.
Self-interest, good. Okay. What is the self-interest, though?
Well, survival, like, and propagation, expansion, whatever it is.
Okay. Could it also be, could we say, from a rational choice model, they're acting in that capacity, following the rational choice theory, maximizing utility?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The Darwinian explanation is not that. The Darwinian explanation is, at rock bottom, states are made up of people. People are evolved entities, and those evolved entities, our cognitive architecture evolved not to maximize utility, but to maximize fitness. That changes everything. So their explanations for warfare, for territorial wars, for even the relations that we have, even language, is all couched in evolutionary terms. For example, language is something from their perspective evolved. And that's, again, an enigma. It's very hard for them to explain. But anyway, language. What is the purpose of language from a Darwinian point of view, based upon what we've discussed so far? I thought that was a rat. It's actually a mic. Go ahead. Who wants to answer that?
Yes, okay, see, pause your video.
Purpose of a language is to communicate with our fellow man or woman.
See, that's you being rational. I want you to think like a Darwinist. What is the purpose of language?
I think to based on naturalism, so just to survive, and this is just a mean of survival.
Yeah,
and propagating our genes. That's it.
That's it.
Nothing more.
So Dawkins puts it in the following terms. He says, language is manipulation of the signal receiver by the signal giver. and the manipulation is essentially for fitness maximization. Now, this is the thing I don't understand. I really don't understand. Richard Dawkins recently, did you see what he did during the Hajj season? That tweet. Yeah. What did he say?
Religion is delusion.
He said religion is a mental infection, and he had a picture of the Kaaba and people praying there. Again, he's not acting in a science capacity. He's not thinking like a Darwinian, because religion and all of its rituals, the language rituals or the worship rituals, the only explanation that they have is a adaptive explanation. So they have to explain, oh, the reason why people believe in God is because God is a abstract concept which allows social cohesion, and groups that are more cohesive are more likely to win wars and survive because they cooperate. Therefore, that's why we actually believe in God, because of the adaptive functions. You know, they have this idea that we are natural creationists because that's the way evolution made us evolve. Why do we believe in morality? We believe in this type of morality because it has adaptive features. We have this particular way of communicating because we want to communicate to maximize our resources for our survival over others. Literally, their entire worldview is based upon this, right? Now, applying Darwinian principles from a state level, in the beginning, what did we speak about? What was the consequence of that? What actually happened? Let's be frank here. What actually happened? This is right in the beginning. I think, Tariq, you mentioned it. What was the consequence of Darwin's ideas being applied at state level?
Was there a justification during the period, like the scramble of Africa and the colonies?
Yes.
And justifying the white people, European countries, being in charge of like black people or the African countries.
Yeah. So colonization, okay? Now, this is very, very important. This is very, very important, right? Colonization is something we don't fully grasp. Everybody blames Christianity for colonization, when actually the real culprit is capitalism. Christianity just happened to be alive and well at the same time that you had this capitalistic venture. It was Darwin that gave Europeans a scientific grounding for their colonization. He was explicit about the people all over the world who are non-Caucasian being savages. And this is something which is not really understood that well. And a lot of people, they have this question, why focus on Darwinism? Why focus on evolution? Give me another theory that's led to the deaths of millions of people. Give me another theory that's been used to justify genocide, justify mass rapes, justify exploitation of people, genocide of people. Give me another theory that led to the types of actions that Hitler was taking, the types of actions that were taken by the communist states, the types of actions in this country. In this country. Oh, Darwin had nothing to do with it. Shut up. Darwin had nothing to do with it. Darwin's son, Leonard Darwin, he was the president of the Eugenics Society. Is that just a coincidence that Darwin's son happened to be the president of the Eugenics Society? They will come out with all these absurd types of things. So we have to understand, we're dealing with a murderous theory. In this country, if somebody was to espouse extremist ideology, they'd get locked up. Scientifically, what Darwinism has done to the world and the deaths of millions of people, and then when you try and challenge it, firstly it's based on philosophy, then it has these massive consequences on people's lives, and then we're told, why are you being anti-scientific? It's like, shut your mouth. I will speak out against this theory and I will teach others to do it, because this theory has caused immense damage. Now, Desmond and Moore, they speak about something which is often laid out, that Darwinism true Darwinism, classic Darwinism, has nothing to do with social Darwinism or Darwin himself, right? So they write, social Darwinism is often taken to be something extraneous and ugly concretion added to the pure Darwinian corpus after the event, tarnishing Darwin's image. But his notebooks make that competition, free trade, imperialism, racial extermination, and sexual inequality were written into the equation from the start. Darwinism was always intended to explain human society. And to end upon, forget people who actually refer to Darwinism, right, and are explaining it years later, even if they're academic. Let's just go to Darwin himself. At some future period, not very distant as measured by centuries, the civilized races of man will almost certainly exterminate and replace throughout the world the savage races, which is all of us, except half of that guy. Isn't it a coincidence? And I've asked this to people when I'm having debates with them, right? Isn't it a coincidence that the number one champions of Darwinism and its most vocal proponents happen to be of the same race that the theory purports are the most civilized? Is it the case that us savages are not cognitively articulating the theory, not understanding the theory? It's not being articulated to us because we're too thick. This is actually a confirmation of the theory, that the people who are proposing the theory, they also happen to be the one who are the most receptive to the theory? Or is it the case that you are more likely to promote a theory that actually says you are the most superior? But what's funny, and I find this really funny, right? It's not just Caucasians. Darwin had an idea. And the idea was, it's not just that the Caucasians are all, superior to the savages. There's a particular type of Caucasian which is more superior to everyone. And it happens to be a British, English, Victorian Caucasian. He actually made this argument. And do you know what his justification for why Victorian English Caucasians were superior to the Spanish or the French or the Germans? Have a guess.
With a bigger empire.
They are the most efficient in colonization. So, to summarize, today's session was just a 360 view. Every single session that we do, we're now going to break into each particular element in more detail. The philosophy of it, the science of it, universal common ancestry, what is natural selection and random mutation as a mechanism, the challenges to it, the work of critics, the third way evolutionists and what they say, extended evolutionary synthesis guys and their defense of Darwinism. Then we'll look into obviously social Darwinism, Darwinism and its relation to international relations, and a whole bunch of things about existential questions and the way that Darwinism tries to tackle it. We'll obviously go into morality as well, because that's a big one. The origin of morality, the origin of ethics. And we will look into all of these things in a way that we will get down to the nitty-gritty and the details. The epistemology as well. How our rational faculties actually evolved, what the Darwinian predictions are, and what the data actually says. And to tie all of this up, we're going to be finishing off the section, inshallah, with social Darwinism today. Not social Darwinism of the 20th century or the 19th century, but today. What does social Darwinism actually mean? And once we've done all of that, my plan is to get everyone here to start making content on Darwinism in a more deeper way, inshallah. Okay? So Jazakallah khair for listening. That is the first session. And we can do the Q&A now, inshallah.
Can I just ask a question?
Yes.
Right. How does Darwin explain the Persian civilization, the Mesopotamian civilization, the Egyptian civilization, when our ancestors were wearing cloth of gold when his were in the caves. How does he explain
You see,
that?
these are called recalcitrant facts. These are facts that resist the theory. Darwin and his followers had a habit of explaining away things like this. Okay, during the time of Darwin, there was actually the Ottoman Empire was still alive. The Ottomans fought a battle against the I don't know which of the Europeans it was, but anyway, it was a battle around the year 1871. And this is near the end of Darwin's life. He's still commenting, right? He says the Turkish savages have been beaten hollow by the Caucasians, by the so-called civilized races, right? Now, he just needs to go back 2 centuries, 3 centuries. The Ottomans were dominating the Europeans, right? Now, if we are to go back even before then, to go to the ancient Egyptians and what they made, and then you compare that with Stonehenge, there's a whole bunch of facts which don't add up. But what it is, I want you to recognize something. Naturalism is true, and then we have to explain away everything in whatever way we can. The fossil record, and I want you to, this thing is going to make you laugh. We are told the first proponents of Darwinism, the rational scientists, Huxley, Darwin, and all these early adopters, Asa Gray, whatever, they are there, and then the people who are going against them are all these religious bigots. But actually, no. Alfred Russel Wallace, he dissented, and so did paleontologists and other scientists and stuff. What did the paleontologists, what did the fossil guys say? They said, well, this doesn't add up because we have the Cambrian explosion. We have this massive expansion of body forms and all these different organisms which are coming, and we cannot have these transitions working in a gradualistic way. And Darwin said, my theory will break down if it's not gradualistic. And his answer was, the fossil record is imperfect. In the future, we will discover the fossils which are missing. But he said something else which is really interesting, which I found funny. He said, I didn't realize how imperfect the fossil record was until I realized that it contradicted my theories. Like literally his paradigm is, my theory is correct. My theory is correct. And I didn't recognize how bad the fossil record was until this thing happened. But like I said, the philosophy comes first. The data is irrelevant. I'll give you something more abstract, genetics. We discovered something phenomenal in the early 2000s, especially 2012. We discovered that a large part of our genome is functional. For decades, Darwinists were telling us our genome is filled with junk. One of the prominent Darwinists, Philip Kitcher, he said, most of the genome is junk, so God needs to go back to school. Is that a scientific statement? But this is what these guys are saying. They even wrote, and I actually did my master's thesis on junk DNA. So I had to look into all of the papers and all the stuff going back, right? Junk DNA, Darwinists were saying, do not even bother spending scientific money on looking for function, because natural selection through our evolutionary history has left a bunch of junk in our DNA. They discovered in a study by ENCODE, the Encyclopedia of DNA Elements, this is the Americans and this is the Europeans coming together, they spent a lot of money. They discovered through ENCODE that 80% of our what was considered junk is functional. It has real epistemic and non-epistemic value in terms of diseases, in terms of hereditary issues, all this stuff, right? Now, this was a seismic shift. This was a seismic shift. This is like discovering the Rosetta Stone, or this is like discovering when we first discovered the size of the universe, or we discovered the universe is expanding. Like, it's literally a groundbreaking study. What was the response of the Darwinists? I just want you to look at something, all right? A whole bunch of them went crazy online. P.Z. Myers, Jerry Coyne. These guys don't know what they're talking about. Is junk. Okay. Not only did the Darwinists kill social Darwinists, kill millions of people, right? The policies of social Darwinism led to the deaths of millions of people. They were blocking an important scientific discovery for decades because they believed in their theory. Now we've discovered that gene switches and a whole bunch of other mechanisms, we've discovered that all of this treasure trove will help us deal with diseases, deal with diabetes, deal with blood pressure, deal with basically everything. Like so many things can be dealt with because we now recognize that this non-coding region is really functional and it has purpose and we should look into it. The Darwinists went crazy and said, no, it's wrong, it's whatever. Okay, fine. Then what you're basically saying is all of these scientists who spend millions, who found all these functions, these are all lies just because you want your theory to be correct. What did Richard Dawkins do? And this is why I say Richard Dawkins is a genius. He is a genius. Not only is he a genius in terms of rhetoric, he is a genius in terms of deflection. He had a debate with Jonathan Sacks. He was a chief rabbi in the UK and he was an Oxford-trained philosopher. He's very sharp. They had a debate and this debate was, I think, in London somewhere. And I was watching this debate. It's crazy. Jonathan Sacks is very clever and he's up to date with the science. He said, well, now we've discovered that junk DNA is no longer junk. Now, remember what the backdrop is. Jerry Coyne, PZ Myers, all these guys are going crazy online, these new atheists, and they're saying it's not junk. These guys don't know what they're talking about, right? Dawkins does the most sophisticated deflection I've seen a Darwinian do. He goes, I don't know why you're bringing up junk DNA being functional and creationists are using this argument. Of course, natural selection would not leave junk in the human genome. He just completely made the data fit the theory. For decades and decades and decades, scientific literature is filled with Darwinists saying the human genome is junk. When it's no longer found to be junk, then the answer is, well, of course it's not junk. Natural selection, why would natural selection leave junk? That's so inefficient. That's not going to help you survive. So they have an answer for everything. And they did the same thing in paleontology. They did this when they finally paleontologists admitted there is no gradualism in the fossil record. Then they came up with a new theory, punctuated equilibrium. Of course, we can't expect things to be gradual. They can be like this. And even though Darwin said, without gradualism, my theory fails, they will always give an explanation. And this is why Darwinism is unfalsifiable. You cannot falsify it. There is no piece of data that can go against the theory. All of the data will always fit the theory because the theory has a shapeshifter mindset. It can always weave around. And junk DNA, if they can do that with junk DNA after barking for decades, yeah, that junk, no, it's not junk, no, this is, you shouldn't study it, blah, blah, blah. And then they can do a, 180 move live in a debate, and then that becomes their new narrative. What do they go to show you? It goes to show you we have to tackle the bull by the horns, and the horns are philosophical. They're not scientific. And if you try and tackle Darwinism scientifically, you will fail. You will fail. Because scientifically, you cannot challenge it. You have to challenge it philosophically. Any other questions?
Just a basic question, because you mentioned at the start that for Darwinists, they'll say that design is an illusion.
Yes.
So could you just go over that one more time?
Okay. Alien lands on Earth. Naturalistic alien. So the only thing that he has to use his cranium to come up with answers is time, space, matter, energy, laws are the only explanation I have. Now, I have a fly, and the fly has incredible omniscience. It has all these lenses. I'm not sure if anybody's seen the pictures where they do a HD picture of a fly with his lenses. Anyone seen that? It's mind-blowing. So he will look at the fly's eyes and say, that looks like design, but there's no God. Remember, he doesn't believe in God. So there has to be a naturalistic explanation. I have to now assume that the design came about by a blind process. And that blind process is, well, you could have had an initial form of life, however it came, and then you had mistakes in its copying errors. You had random mutations, point mutations, insertions, deletions, whatever. You had some. The fodder you have to play with is every time it replicates, there's new data there, and some is more likely to survive than others. Over billions of years, the get out of jail card is time. You get the eyes. So they cannot ever say design is real. They have to say design is an illusion. And this is also why Richard Dawkins in River Out of Eden, he says, design is a good working heuristic.